So let's quickly review, shall we? What have we done? Number one is we've grabbed this script from week 6 and we've executed the create table to create our ASP.NET user tokens because we need that in order to do third-party authentication. So we're going to run that script and it builds this ASP.NET user token in our database. This allows our Google login to work. Where last week we were getting an error. We've created 2 new models. Application user, which inherits from the identity package's identity user class. And we need this reference, which Visual Studio prompts us to make. And then we've also added a class for managing roles. So this inherits from identity role. So we're going to leave both of these classes as empty. We don't need to define anything in here. We just need these 2 objects inheriting from identity role and identity user, respectively. So now in my DB context object, we're going to modify this to inject these classes. So whenever we create an instance of our database connection, we want it to be aware of and to keep track of both the user's identity as well as the user's roles. So we're going to pass those 2 classes in. Now it's complaining here, saying you can't use these 2 arguments. So the thing is we're actually missing one more necessary argument. I'll put some comments here explaining this. The last argument that it wants, so notice in this method signature, there's actually 3 arguments. There's a user, but we've got that. The second parameter is a role, we've got that. The third parameter is a key. So what it's asking it for is simply a data type. What data type are we using for the user primary keys? It needs to know how to track the users. What data type are our user values, user ID values? Yeah, they're 128 character string. So if I define this as a string, my IDE is happy. So we're injecting the user and role classes as well as the user ID PK data type. Way DB can track the user and their roles. So we're saying whenever you connect to the database, also keep in memory, attach who the user is, what their roles are. So this will almost fix. I'm going to comment out, take out this line. So don't need the warning. This will almost fix our authorization problem. Not quite, but almost. So I'm going to log out and log in again as an administrator. Expecting we're going to get an error. which is okay because we have a fix for it. Okay, there are actually two more things we need to do to get this finished. So I'll log in as administrator. I'll try. I think this will die. Okay. So it's now trying, saying I'm trying to manage the users, but this type isn't included. So there's a couple more small changes we need to make to fix this. One is in our startup file. So I'm going to modify. So this line of code was here by default. The only thing I changed here down on line 45 was this defaulted to the application DB context. I changed this to use our own database context. So I'm just going to comment this out, because instead of adding the default identity, we want to configure identity. I'm going to call add identity. So notice on line 45, it was managing users, but it doesn't say anything about managing roles. So we want to manage both users and roles using those two classes we created.
So the part was managing just the users, but not their roles?
If we're not managing roles, then the default code works that I've commented out. Still add the default UI. Bootstrap 4. But we want to add role tracking. We're going to use a role manager class.
And where's the role manager class come from?
It's part of identity.
That's one enormous change.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the default token providers that'll handle third party.
Application role have the nested set of.
Yep, I'll figure it out. Role manager.
Startup, man.
No. Add roles. I'll just take this out for just a second. We'll see where that gets us.
Yeah, the role manager seems to be.
The lowest context is missing brackets.
Thank you. So we need that. The order we put these in doesn't really matter. All right, let me try and put that back now. It doesn't like our role manager line. Wait. I have one extra bracket. You'd think well, you know what, counting, I get confused when I'm counting. When I'm good with one, I'm good with two. Once I start counting three and above, I get in trouble. I 3 brackets. So the default code only manages identity. It's not set up to use the role manager to look after roles and permissions. So we're disabling the default identity call and we're configuring identity. So I think we'll need to make one more change. I think this is still going to give us an error, but it may give us a different error. I will try again to log in as my administrator. I think we got to make one more small change. Yeah, we'll take a break shortly. So let's see what happens. So this code that's in the startup, you can use exactly in your assignment. I don't expect you to use different code there. It's just identity boilerplate code. Okay. So we got a different error now. So it's expecting normalized name and concurrency stamp in the roles table. Okay, so I want to execute this as well. I should have run the whole script. This is the first part of the script. I didn't run it. So I'll alter my table. We'll try again. There's probably still one more change. Okay. So now we get this. No type has been registered. That's actually a little login section of our header. It doesn't, okay, well, part of the clue is that it's in the view because it's saying razor, which is the view syntax. So the render page isn't working. And in here, it's when it's trying to render a partial. I'm trying to see if it's got the name here. So it's saying there's a problem in the layout when trying to render a partial. So if I open up my layout file, it isn't easy to see, but I'll show you where. So in my layout, it's got a partial tag here, my login partial. So this is where the problem is. So in here, it's complaining about identity user. What it wants is our application user class we defined. So it wants to know the class we're using for managing identities. So on lines 2 and 3, I'm just going to change this to our application user class. Oops. Oops, hang on. I'll explain in just a minute. Changing identity user to application user here. We want to use this class we've just created. This should fix this. So not only does it finally work, but now it knows I'm an administrator because my store link shows up. I'll just log out. My store link is gone. when I log in as an administrator, it now recognizes it's tracking my role through that role manager. And now when I click store, because I'm in the proper role, I can go in and I can view, edit, delete. Here where I'm logged in as a regular user, I don't see the link. If I try and go here, I've got access to that because I'm not in the right role. So I had to change the login. I had to define the role and user class. Peter, we'll talk more about dependency injection after a break, but we're actually using it here as well. I had to inject those classes into our DB context. And we had to configure identity to also manage roles. Again, we're injecting them here. So we'll talk about dependency injection a bit more later, but we should take a break first.